Can you tell me a bit about yourself, including your name, pronouns, and your identity?
Hi, I'm Sarah. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as a lesbian. And I identify as an older lesbian because I'm now in my late 50s.
And when were you born?
So I was born in 1963.
And what drew you to participate in this project?
I think because as I will explain more, I sort of came out and got involved in community organising at a very interesting time in the late 1980s. So I feel like I have some kind of interesting memories from that time that I always enjoy revisiting. And also because I'm kind of interested in making sure that our histories don't get lost and that they're recorded for people to access in the future.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And can you tell me a bit about your life leading up to being a community organiser?
Well, I suppose I grew up in the southeast of England in Kent, and then when I was 19, I went up to Newcastle upon Tyne to go to university, and that was in 1982. And I was quite involved. I've always been quite involved in a lot of political activism. So at the time, I was involved in a lot of sort of social justice movement activism, particularly the anti-apartheid movement. That was my kind of big thing that I did a lot of activism around, but also things like, supporting the miners during the miners' strike in the mid-80s, and quite a lot of just general activism around things like boycotts of companies that were operating in South Africa and things like that. So I was quite politically involved already in the kind of mid-80s, and I led that kind of life where I was involved with a lot of activists, and we were all also, quite a lot of activism around feminism. And I was actually arrested at a protest, a feminist protest in the mid-80s. So then, when in the late 1980s, I came out as a lesbian, it just seemed a kind of natural thing that activism would be part of my life, and it would continue into LGBT activism. So so there's various different types, I suppose, of community organising in terms of kind of political activism, but also kind of organising community kind of support and community.
And I touched on a little bit of this, but what first prompted you to become a community organiser?
I think, as I said, it was a natural part of my journey, really, from the sort of activism that I had been involved with from perhaps being a student, or maybe even before being a student, all through my teens. I was very politically motivated, but also there's a fantastic kind of social side to it as well, obviously. So a lot of people were involved in activism. When I was in the Northeast in Newcastle, we had a little group called the Campaign Against Heterosexism. We used to meet, it's a little campaigning group, and that's where I made lots of friendships, and then we all would sort of go out together socially and things as well. So there was the social side to it, but really, the blatant kind of homophobia and oppression of lesbian and gay people at the time, as I said, not inclusive of bisexual and trans people, was one of the things that prompted me, and the feeling of being part of a movement which is going to kind of bring about change, because we knew that we would bring about change, and we did. So yeah, that was the motivation.
Absolutely, that's great. And we covered, I think, the next bit about community or communities that you're part of. You mentioned, for example, the Northeast.
Yeah.
Isn't that?
Yeah.
And any more on what your goals and hopes were when you started community organising?
I think we had some, there were some very specific goals in terms of that campaigning side of things that we were doing around sort of preventing Section 28 from being enacted in the law, which of course we didn't do. And that came much later on. But also there were sort of individual campaigns and, as I said, against things like the homophobia in the press. There was a big issue in Newcastle at the time, a big campaign around lesbian couple who had fostered a child who then wanted to adopt it. And no, sorry, that's wrong. A child was being fostered, was what a lesbian couple were going to adopt the child. The child was placed with the couple for adoption. And then when the foster carers found out the child had been placed with a lesbian couple, they protested and the child was returned to the foster carers and adopted by the foster carers. So there was a big campaigns around things like parenting and campaigns around, there were sort of lesbians who were in sort of custody battles to be able to keep the children. So later on, as I tell more of what I've been involved with as a parent now, I'd been involved in quite a lot of sort of community organising around LGBT parents when I became a parent, but those kind of strands and things were already in there about families and relationships and people's rights, really. So those were the kind of goals that we had. And just equality, just a strong sense of social justice and the importance of equality.
The members of community organising that still stand out to you?
Oh, endless meetings, of course, is one of the memories. And that kind of, I think it's important to say that, it's not always all sweetness and light within sort of LGBT organisations or activism. There are differences, and people have quite a lot of, just because people share that identity of being part of an LGBT community, it doesn't mean that they share other identities or other viewpoints. So there were quite a lot of heated discussions, I remember. It's just occurred to me that actually when I moved to Manchester, I was involved in another sort of organising, which was always involved through my trade union, quite a lot in LGBT organising. So I was a member of Unison, and I was involved in their LGBT, forgotten what it was called, section maybe, I can't remember anyway. And so we had our own regional meetings, and I went to national conference once, and I was a sort of LGBT rep in my branch. So that was another whole area of community organising, which was, I suppose, much more top down, in that it was organised nationally by a union, but we could get involved in kind of local things through that. And within that, there were lots of debates. Particularly, I suppose, because at that time, in the sort of late 90s where that was happening, there was more awareness of the sort of intersectionality, and there was a disabled members section as well, and obviously a Black members section, and women members. And so there were sometimes quite a lot of kind of debates around access and how we were making things accessible for everybody, and how we were kind of challenging racism within communities. So all those kind of issues were coming more to the fore, and I kind of remember quite a lot of discussions around those sort of things. And in terms of the more kind of community-based organising, as I was saying, I got involved quite a lot in LGBT parents organising. I remember that before I adopted my children, I remember very clearly going to groups for people who had already adopted or fostered children, and just the kind of excitement of meeting people who had already done it, because it was a very, very unusual thing at the time. So we're talking about 2000, around the turn of the millennium. And having come from Newcastle, where as I already said, there was that, there was a major campaign around the fact that lesbians were not then allowed to adopt, and there was an actual rule in the local authority, it was very different coming to somewhere like Manchester, where it felt like the local authority did look at equalities, you know, and it had tried to in its policies. So I was quite amazed when I found that, you know, they would accept applications from LGBT people to adopt. So that was very exciting. That was another kind of point in my life where getting involved in the organising sort of directly affected me and my life, and the two things were very closely aligned, and it was a very important time.
Yes, and I think you mentioned Unison there. They are active supporters at Pride.
Yes.
Manchester and local prides as well.
All right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great to see them carrying on that good tradition. Yeah. And how do you think your identity has been influenced by your experiences as a community organizer?
I think it's been really important, because I think being a community organizer sort of places you in your community, and it gives you a kind of role within your community. I sort of see that, you know, some people might do that through perhaps more of a sort of social way. I know there are people who kind of, you know, bars and clubs and things are the most important bit of LGBT life to them. But I've never been very good at that. I've never been a great drinker and clubber. Yeah. So I think I do better sort of in those environments where you're working with people to do something. So it's really been a big part of my LGBT identity. Connecting, you know, so connecting from your own personal experience to a wider community experience. It's been really important to me. Yeah.
And is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Sarah?
Oh, I'm sure I could talk for ages about all sorts of things. But no, I think it's been really useful just to kind of reflect on my part, I suppose, in kind of community organising, and that sort of sense of being a little cog in a bigger machine of making change, really. And I think we all have a role to play in that. And you don't always know until after it's happened and you look back on it and you reflect on it. You don't kind of always realise how important things are at the time. So it's great to have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time today, Sarah.